Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim, here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I couldn't be better. I thought I was as good as I could be a few minutes ago, but it just keeps getting better. How are you today?
Well, that is just grand to hear. I'm very excited that you're doing so well. I'm also doing really well. I'm excited that we speak with two incredible advocates, two people who are sort of in the Crawlspace family. They have worked with the death by incarceration folks, and they now have their own spinoff on the Crawlspace Media Network. It's called Injustice, and we are being joined by Lisa Spees and Spencer Daniels.
And the primary focus of Injustice is the case of Emmanuel, Rios, and Angel Rodriguez, each of whom are serving life sentences for the 1987 murder of Shaun Nelson. And this was based on a conviction obtained through fabrication, prosecutorial misconduct, and defense attorney failures. They've been incarcerated since 1989, and Lisa and Spencer have picked up the gauntlet and run with it as far as clearing their names, hoping that there's some justice. It's a truly in-depth story, very dense with details, but the way they produce this, the way they tell the story, the guests that they have on is masterfully done. Very highly recommended if you're looking for a wrongful conviction case to listen to, probably one that you haven't heard of yet.
Great points, Lance, and couldn't have said it better myself. So make sure to follow Injustice on social media. They're on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. It's at Injustice Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, and it's at Injustice_pod on Twitter.
And you can check out their website at injusticepod.com.
Welcome to the podcast, Lisa Spees and Spencer Daniels. How are you today?
Doing great.
I'm good.
Oh, it was perfectly in stereo. Good job.
We have developed this over a good amount of time here, that everything we do is in synchronicity.
Well, that's a really good segue into the conversation. Everything you do is in synchronicity. What is it that the two of you do, and how did the two of you meet and decide to do what it is you do?
So we have a mutual friend with the Death by Incarceration podcast, Kevin McCracken and Suave, and I knew them, and Spencer was friends with Kevin for a long time, and so we kind of met up through him.
Yeah, I've been really good friends with Kevin for, 30 years now, maybe. So we go way back, and they were working on their podcast and starting to get some calls for requests to do some wrongful conviction stuff, and the scope of their podcast is much larger than that. So they kind of put us together, and so Lisa and I just really only met a handful of months ago.
Well, it feels like you guys go back decades.
It does to us as well. We're like an old married couple sometimes.
Well, you're both hosting the new podcast, Injustice. Can you tell us a little bit about the podcast?
Sure. We're looking into the case of Emmanuel Rios and Angel Rodriguez, who in 1989 were convicted for murder of a young man named Shaun Nelson. And the only witness against them was a man by the name of Romance MacArthur. And Romance had incidentally confessed to this exact murder 2 years prior on tape in the office of an attorney. And so these guys have been in prison for 32 years, even though there's a confession tape out there. And so we just really dug into this case. We got our hands on the confession tape, which was done in the office of a man named Charles Peruto, who just a couple of weeks ago ran for district attorney in Philadelphia. And about couple of weeks prior to that election, he actually agreed to an interview. So we did a whole episode dedicated to an interview of just him getting his reaction to what was going on. But other than that, we got these two guys who've been in there for almost 33 years, and we think it's time for them to get out.
I think, too, to say that we're more of an advocacy-based podcast. So at the end of each episode, we have a call to action where our listeners can go sign a petition or donate $5 or share an episode to try to get these lesser known wrongful conviction cases more widely heard, and to actually benefit them in some way even though they're still incarcerated, try to gain traction and support for their case.
Yeah, the advocacy thing is something that we really try to focus on.
And do either of you mind giving a little bit of background about yourselves as far as where you come from? And then how did that maybe relate to getting involved as an advocate for the wrongfully convicted?
So I basically, like a lot of white women, enjoy Dateline and 48-Hour Mystery. And that's sort of what my weekend is based around. And so, probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I had seen an episode on Marty Tankleff's case. And then I followed Ryan Ferguson's wrongful conviction for about 8 years. And Ryan's case at the very end, I was very emotionally invested in seeing this wrong be made right. And so I was doing these little things, social media posts and sending emails to my friends to sign a petition or to do whatever they were asking, write letters, whatever it was at the time. And I remember when Ryan pulled away from the jail, his dad had bought a Chevy Cruze and had it wrapped in Ryan's face and information. And they pulled away. I thought, I could do something like that. But there were no other cases in Missouri where I was living at the time that I really thought needed help. They all had advocates and people were kind of doing their thing. And I also didn't know exactly what I would do because I'm not a lawyer, but I had that kind of seed planted in my head. And then a few years later, I watched a documentary on a wrongful conviction case in Virginia. And it was a little bit different because it was a clemency case. But I ended up reaching out to the individual that was wrongfully convicted and his family. And we started working together to try to raise the profile and to help him. And within about 4 months, I decided to move from Missouri to Virginia and work on that case. Now it's been about 5 years since then, and I've worked on 9 cases where people have come home. And this is a passion thing for me. I love being a part of this. I adore the people that I've met while doing this. And, each win kind of builds the momentum of wanting to do it again and again. So that's kind of how I got involved and where I'm kind of at with it now.
Lisa brings the credibility, and I've been saying this talking about this over the past week, that I'm sort of the emotional wild card of this pairing. I don't have a background in advocacy or doing any of this type of work. I'm just I'm a storyteller. And like I said, I've known Kevin McCracken for 30 years, and he knows that's sort of a passion of mine, is whether it's getting on stage or just telling stories, whatever it is. He thought that the two of us, Lisa and I, would be a good pairing because of the sort of yin and yang of covering these cases where, she can come in and speak intelligently and know the intricacies of this case. And I have been known to say some somewhat inflammatory things. In fact, on the upcoming episode, I say there's some questionable things about a former prosecuting assistant district attorney in Philadelphia that may or may not get me in trouble.
Well, both of you definitely add to the credibility and lend to each other well, one being the detail-oriented one and the other being the storytelling. It's like the play-by-play and the color analyst on a sporting event. So it lends to each other. But Lisa, you said that you moved, not just recently, but you said you moved, and you specifically moved because of this. Because of your passion to be an advocate.
Right. So clemency cases are different than cases where you have options to get back into court. And clemency, especially in Virginia, it's all about relationships. It's about building relationships with decision makers and with people that have influence over decision makers. And so when I decided to do all of this, I'm kind of a all-in person. And if I was going to do this and carry the weight of doing this in my head, I wanted to be doing everything possible that I could do on my end to get to that positive outcome that we wanted to get to. And really, there are ways to do it where you're out of state, but being brand new, I didn't know how to do that. And I wanted to win. I wanted that individual to be free. And so I knew that moving would get me closer to that outcome that I desired. And I was also at a time where, I don't have children. Wasn't in a relationship. And so moving wasn't really that big of a deal to me at the time. Everything pointed towards Virginia.
All right. So this case that you are tackling in season 1 of Injustice, romance and murder, tell me a little bit more about this confession tape. What is on the confession tape?
So Romance was asked to go in to A. Charles Peruto's office and give this confession sort of at the behest of Emmanuel Rios, one of the guys that ended up in prison. Romance had worked for him, and the purpose of the confession was only to draw the focus away from Emmanuel, better known as June. So June asked him to go to his attorney's office and make this confession on tape. So Romance went in and he described in pretty good detail that it was an accident, that he was attempting to scare Shaun Nelson. So he pulled the gun out as they were in the car driving, and the gun went off. Sadly, a young man lost his life. So that tape, when the trial started, a lot of things happened over the next 2 years. The case went unsolved for 2 years until Romance was being indicted on another charge. He said, "Hey, I have some information about this murder." When June and Spanky is the nickname of Angel Rodriguez, when they went to trial, they called Peruto to the stand to produce the confession tape, and he claims to have lost it. So that's one of the things that I wanted to speak to him about, and what we brought up in the interview that I did with him. And his story, it's a little unbelievable. It's more than a little unbelievable. He says that he had a cleaning crew, and they mixed up the confession, a murder confession cassette tape with all of his music cassette tapes. And it stayed there for 5 years until he was in a car one day and he grabbed a tape to put it in, and it just so happened to be the murder confession.
See, I have, Tim gave me a tape once that was a Hot Summer Mix 94, and I just went to listen to it the other day, and it's DB Cooper.
Shut up.
No, that's totally serious. Yep, just mislabeled it. I was expecting to hear some No Doubt, and I got DB Cooper instead.
Okay, so who is this driving and supposedly popped the cassette in?
Romance MacArthur.
Okay, run down a list of the characters for us, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of names and then a lot of nicknames.
Sure. So Emmanuel Rios, known as June or Crippled June. Angel Rodriguez, known as Spanky. Romance MacArthur, that's actually his given name, as near as I can tell. There's nothing to say otherwise. That's what's listed in the court records. Romance MacArthur. And Shaun Nelson, the young man that was killed. Other than that, it's people in positions of power, like Roger King, who was the assistant district attorney, and A. Charles Peruto, who was the once attorney turned witness. Those are the main characters.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about this attorney turned witness, because that's where the confession tape happened, right? In Peruto's office. What would have happened if the tape wasn't lost?
June and Spanky wouldn't have been convicted. If the tape, when Peruto showed up to testify at trial, he told the court, he testified that Romance had given this confession, and he even provided a transcript of the tape's confession, but he didn't have the tape itself. And so Roger King was able to create doubt that the confession even really existed, and questioned Peruto's character and all sorts of things during his testimony. And it gave the jury an easy way out to kind of disregard the transcript completely.
Yeah, if the tape had been there, I think there would have been no doubt as to their innocence.
Okay, so but Peruto testified everything that was on the tape, and then gave the transcript. So, but somewhere along the lines, the tape got lost, and it was in Peruto's hands at one point. So maybe someone in that office apparently lost it. What benefit would that have been to lose it?
That's unclear.
Well, it's unclear, but there was a lot of corruption in Philadelphia for decades. Roger King is a notorious prosecutor there. There are dozens of cases that he's handled that have been misconduct has been proven. We can't say exactly what the motivation would have been, but the story that Peruto tells doesn't make any sense, that the tape got mixed up in music in a car and he suddenly finds it 5 years later. Doesn't make a lot of sense. It is not the story that June and Spanky were told when the tape was found, that it had been found in Peruto's father's safe. Just nothing about any of this makes sense.
But there was no inconsistency on the in the transcript versus the tape? Nothing different necessarily?
I don't know that we've seen the actual transcription.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So we don't know for sure. There is discussion of it in the transcripts, but even if it was word for word, just the taken out of context, like where a text message where you can't read intention. So I think some of that is taken away. You can hear in his voice he's very unsure and he's very soft spoken, and he talks about how it was an accident. Another interesting fact to this case is that Romance, even after playing a large part in getting what was his friend, June, convicted and sent to prison, wrote letters. They actually corresponded in letters for several years. And Romance had stated over and over that he was going to help them get out. He was going to, come forward and tell the truth. None of that ever materialized, but one of the details that came about in these letters, Romance claims to have been in Roger King's office one day while Peruto was in there. He was Romance was getting ready to testify, and Roger King had Peruto scared, and it had something to do with he was possibly threatening him with some sort of legal recourse, disbarment, for not turning over a felony murder confession. He said that he did it just to protect his client. But, one of the questions I asked in the interview of him is, did you have a legal obligation to turn this confession over immediately? He wasn't your client. There's no privilege there. And if you didn't have a legal obligation, did you at least have a moral obligation? And he said, well, I wanted to, but it happened so fast that the tape was lost. So whether or not that conversation did happen where King threatened him with some sort of legal recourse for not having turned that tape over, Peruto may have been scared and sort of didn't deny the existence of the tape, but was unable to produce it.
What would the repercussions be? Why would he be scared in someone in his position?
I think that Romance indicated that King threatened him with disbarment for misconduct. The interesting thing is it's in the court file that Peruto did write a letter to the homicide unit saying that he had this confession. No one reached back out. And for all we know, it could be some sort of misconduct with another case that Peruto and King were on together. We don't really know why this would have happened, but it's hard to imagine Romance MacArthur making all of this story up about Peruto and King at the office and what King is saying to Peruto. It seems far-fetched that he would make all of that up.
King and Peruto were pretty big players in the legal world at that time. Peruto was still fairly young in his career, but he'd made his name defending mafia types and drug lords and like all these sort of big time felons. And so he would have been going up against Roger King quite often. So whether or not there was something left over from a previous case or they were in cahoots somehow, there's some sort of connection there. So there's a lot of unanswered questions and open ends to this case.
So Emmanuel and Angel, they are both still currently incarcerated?
Yeah, I actually was on the phone with Angel a couple of nights ago, very briefly. After 33 years, it's hard to remain optimistic, but they are, grateful that we've taken on this story and trying to get their case out to a larger audience. We told them that we'll be in the parking lot the day that we get them out, and hopefully that day comes soon.
So you said that you've spoken to Rodriguez, right? How many other people? Well, you've also spoken to Peruto. How many other people have you spoken with about this?
Well, We spoke to a number of family members of both of them, and we spoke to a young woman who was dating Romance MacArthur at the time. So we've probably done 10 separate interviews for this case so far, and we've only released 4 episodes.
So as of now, you've released 3 episodes or 4 episodes?
We've released 3 episodes that are sort of serialized for this story, and then the Peruto interview in addition. So 4 total, but 3 as part of this story.
Yeah, all relating to this story. Okay. And how many do you plan on releasing, or is that open-ended because you don't have your solution yet? You don't have your conclusion yet?
As of right now, we are stopping at 6. 6, we have planned to do a just sort of wrap up of the case. We are scheduling video calls with both June and Spanky. So as of right now, that will be our final episode until we can pursue it further.
So what is the route? You mentioned you're excited to be in the parking lot when they are finally released. What are the steps that need to happen to get to that place?
June and Spanky need to get back into court. And that's difficult with cases that are 33 years old because you typically get back into court with new evidence. Because of the lack of investigation and because Emmanuel Rios has an investigator and a lawyer working on the case that are very good, I think that it won't take very long until they find something that will get us back into court for both of them. And whatever Rios, his team finds, will benefit Spanky as well once they get back into court. So it could go down one of 2 ways. You could go back into court and the conviction could be vacated, or you could go back into court and they could order a second trial. I think if all of the evidence was presented to a jury, there's no doubt in my mind now that they would be found not guilty. And, this kind of falls in line with all of the cases that Roger King has prosecuted that are being undone now. And so hopefully this moves along quickly. There's also an opportunity that it could go before the conviction integrity unit and that they could get on board and that this could move much quicker than the court options. So there's a few different avenues to freedom. It's just kind of waiting to see how this all unfolds.
King, for all of his convictions, 7 of his death penalty cases have been overturned so far.
And so the existence of the tape now, after all these years, is sort of what can get the court's attention to spark these occurrences?
Well, the tape could be considered new evidence. However, the tape was known at the time of the trial, right? They mentioned the tape. And so I don't know how likely it is that will be enough to get them back into court on new evidence. Now, it could go much further if presented to the conviction integrity unit and they do their own investigation of the case. That could be very beneficial, but I don't know how helpful just the tape alone would be if going back into court. I think you would need a few more things to shore up that PCRA motion in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and a new trial would be advantageous because at that point, Romance MacArthur would likely be compelled to testify. Romance MacArthur is out walking the streets. He's free. He actually took a plea deal. He pled to a 3rd-degree murder charge for this murder. He claims that he was there, but he didn't take any part in it. So he pled to a 3rd-degree murder charge. He did his time. He's out. We've tried to track him down. We've tried to get him to come on the podcast. We tried to get him to talk to us. He is unwilling to do so. He claims that he said everything that he wanted to say. The problem is nothing bad could happen from him coming forward and discussing this. He can't be tried again. Double jeopardy would be there. The only thing that could happen with him coming forward would be to help June and Spanky get out of prison. Unfortunately, so far, he's been unwilling to do that. So maybe a new trial, if he was compelled to testify, he'd come forward and could help these guys out.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
How daunting of a task is this for the two of you to take on? It sounds like so dense and intricate.
But they're all a lot of every case is a lot of moving pieces. you break it down and you take one thing at a time, right? You hit that first goal, and then set that aside, and then you keep moving towards the next thing. The goal is to hit that momentum point where enough things are moving at the same time that you create multiple paths forward. And I think I think we're right there at that line of seeing that happen with this case. They're all complicated. They're all difficult for different reasons. But when you have people that are innocent in prison, and you have people working to right that wrong, eventually it will happen.
Yeah. And Lisa and I are figuring out how best to split the tasks up so that we can, divide and conquer, sort of. So if she takes one avenue and I take another, and we come back together and we figure it out together. So we have the advantage of that, the benefit of that.
And on that, in addition to it, what about all of these figures that are in the position of influence and, are able to negatively impact your lives? Are you afraid of something like that? Like these individuals like Peruto and King?
Well, King's dead.
I will say real quick that after we released our Peruto episode, which was the week before the election in Philadelphia, Charles Peruto, who was running for office, had nothing better to do than get in a Facebook fight with Lisa in regards to our episode. They exchanged some comments back and forth. So I don't think we fear retribution from Peruto.
No. Peruto wants to insist that Roger King was a good prosecutor and a good lawyer. And what he was good at was convicting innocent people and sending a lot of them to death row, including my friend Jimmy Dennis, who had 25 years of his life stolen. So I'm not in any way afraid of him or any sort of retribution. I've had threats in other cases, and it's just par for the course. You kind of know when you sign up that there are going to be people not wanting you to do what you're doing, and you just kind of deal with it along the way.
But so far, we've dealt with far more positivity in this case. The family has been great, very accommodating. They're very excited that this story is getting out there finally, and that maybe their family members can come home after over 3 decades.
You're talking about Emmanuel and Angel's family?
Yes.
Have you spoken with Shaun Nelson's family at all?
No, I don't know that was a conscious decision to not do that. We've been very clear that even though this story for us, the way we are approaching it, is about June and Spanky, we've been very clear that Shaun Nelson was the victim of this crime. And I don't know how much we would benefit from, talking to his family. There's always the fear of sort of re-victimizing. So yeah, we haven't reached out, and I don't know that would be a great benefit to us.
Now, Romance gave this confession. Did he say who killed Shaun?
Yeah, he did. He said that he did it and it was an accident.
So he said he did it. Okay.
Yeah, the autopsy report fully supports exactly what he said in the confession tape, that a single gunshot at near point blank from his left temple through his right, which, he was sitting upright. The story that he told when he convinced the jury, or had, with the help of Roger King, they were convinced a jury, was that there was the 3 of them, Romance, June, and Spanky, and they took him out in this van, and they pulled him out of the van, and they shot him, which the autopsy conversely does not support that at all, in that when they found Shaun's body on the side of the road, he still had his hat on. I mean, so there was definitely no signs of a struggle. He didn't have a bruise or an abrasion, a cut of any sort, and only had a little bit of blood on the front of his shirt, which again is consistent with sitting in the seat of a car and getting shot through the head.
And in addition to the confession that we have that from Charles Peruto, we also had 2 witnesses at trial who say that Romance confessed to them while they were all incarcerated that he had killed Shaun Nelson and that it was an accident. So it's not just this tape. There are 2 other people that he knew and that Shaun knew that he confessed to as well. Yeah,
I feel like with these wrongful convictions, you reach a point in the conversation that you just don't have anything to say because it's so frustrating, and there's only so much you can do as like a an interviewer, like we're interviewing the two of you and you're interviewing them and family members. And at some point, do you ever get to just a place where you're like exacerbated about the whole thing? You're just exhausted?
Constantly.
Oh, I will say that as the emotional guy and new to this, I am learning that's a large part of it.
So many of the cases defy all common sense. And I remember thinking when I first started advocating for these types of cases, oh, I'm just going to go sit down with somebody and like explain to them what happened, and then we'll get this all straightened out. And like the fact of the matter is they don't really care. You know, people have been convicted and the burden shifts to the person that was convicted once that happens to prove that they're innocent. And that's very difficult to do.
And you get that right away when you talk to somebody that they don't really care?
Well, sometimes you have the people that say that they really care because they want you to go away.
Yeah.
And so they'll play like they're interested in what you're saying and the facts of a case or whatever. But then you realize kind of quickly when you don't get any other response or there's no follow-up action down the road, there are a lot of people that just straight don't care. I mean, you look at Charles Peruto, the initial email that he sent to us about doing an interview was, "I never forgot Emmanuel." And I was really encouraged by that because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, well, maybe he's going to use his status and power to get on his soapbox and advocate for him. And nothing further could have happened. I mean, it was ridiculous. His story was the jury convicted them and a jury needs to right that wrong in a second trial. Like, he was a part of why these guys got wrongfully convicted, and he won't even do the right thing. So it's maddening a lot of the time. You have to figure out how to deal with that stress and frustration, or you'll burn yourself out really quickly doing this work.
Yeah, see, I think that's an important element to talk about, not only during this interview, but would you ever have any plans to do maybe a sub-series where you talk about those emotions that you two have to go through as well? I don't think a lot of people understand the self-care that needs to go into it.
Yeah, we've talked about a few different kind of sub-series that we could do kind of running throughout. And I think that could be a really great idea for people. I preach self-care, and even preaching it and knowing how important it is, I have a really hard time implementing it all the time because there's always work to be done. And when I'm working on a case, I want to see constant progress happening. But I will burn myself out sometimes. I'll need a day or a week or sometimes a month to kind of recover from a disappointment or life things that are happening in the midst of some disappointments in cases. So I definitely think that'd be a great idea.
Yeah, I had taken a little bit of a sabbatical from therapy, and shortly after starting this podcast up, I reached back out to my therapist and I said, "Look, I'm about to partake on this journey, and I think things there's a potential that things might get dark for me, and we need to resume our sessions." So I'm already pursuing therapy. Self-care has got to be a big part of it. I'm still new to the game, so I'm coming in fresh and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and incredibly naive.
Well, I think maybe naive, but idealistic too, that the system works differently than how it really seems to go most of the time. Therapy is certainly a huge part of something I think you have to do if you're involved in this and you're really wanting people to come home. It's certainly been a part of my self-care throughout the entirety of my advocacy work. And I think I would have lost my mind had I not been doing it, especially early on. Those initial disappointments are really hard to deal with, but you just got to kind of deal with it and keep pushing.
Great job taking it on. It comes with so much. It's an endeavor. It's daunting. It's trying to put a ship over a mountain, like you've just got all of this stuff that comes with it. You got the bureaucracy, you've got the families, you've got the victims families, and then just your own personal selves. Like, it takes a lot out of you.
We do take short breaks from digging into this story in itself, and you can get sort of lost in the case. And so, like Lisa said, we have plans to do some sort of bottle episodes where we can take a break, and whether it's look at something a little bit lighter or just something different. We just recently did a bonus episode that we're pretty excited about as well.
Do tell.
Oh, because our release date is typically on Thursday, we didn't want to put an episode out on Thanksgiving. We decided to take a little bit of a break So we sat down a few days ago and reflected back on this previous week, or the week that we're in, and everything that had happened sort of in the world of injustice. So we spoke about the Kyle Rittenhouse case. We spoke about Julius Jones getting taken off of death row. We talked about the Ahmaud Arbery case that's still going. And then another gentleman named Purvis Payne, who's got sort of forgotten about last week, and he's another man that got taken off of death row. So a lot of stuff was happening, and we just decided to push pause on our story and sort of reflect on in the moment with all of the things that were happening. So we have an episode that'll be coming out tomorrow about that.
You might want to amend your episode. I don't know. 21 minutes ago, I got the notification that Ahmaud Arbery's killers have all been found guilty.
Praise God.
Yes, that's great news. And I think that our conversation about that case in particular, that was kind of expected. We really thought that that's what was going to happen. The powers that be don't mind sort of, throwing a couple of old racist white dudes under the bus every now and again, so they can say, see, racism doesn't exist.
What you're saying is this was a bit of an olive branch. Hey, look, I mean, you said it perfectly. Hey, it doesn't exist. Look what we just did with these guys.
Yeah. I mean, that and the, the coffee case that's in Florida. Everybody that's supporting the Rittenhouse verdict has come out and said, look at this guy, Coffee. I can't remember his first name off the top of my head, who just got acquitted of self-defense because some cops bust into his house and he protected himself, and he got acquitted of this murder charge. But what people fail to realize on that is that he's still facing a 30-year prison sentence on a weapons charge, the weapons charge that Rittenhouse, they dismissed from his trial. So yeah, there's a lot of racial components to it that I understand. My privilege in talking about this feels weird sometimes, but yeah, it's stuff that we have to at least bring up.
Wow. Well, this is an exciting show. Thank you so much for joining us here today, talking about it, and really thanks for doing the show. I mean, it's a glimpse into a world that needs more advocates like you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for welcoming us not only onto your podcast today, but onto the team in general, to the Crawlspace Media team.
Of course it had to happen because you come from the Death by Incarceration group, and what they're doing is really great work. And if you two are coming from that group, then of course, it's our obligation. And it turns out that the show is really good and you guys work really well together. And what else are you planning as far as another case once you've wrapped up your 6 episodes with this one?
Yeah, we've already got the next one lined up, and Lisa knows a lot of information about that one.
So our next case will be another Roger King case in Philadelphia. It's a case I've been working on for close to 2 years now. It's a man by the name of Ralph Trent Stokes, who's been on death row for almost 39 years.
Sounds like you're going to have a lot of material if you just use Roger King cases.
We could do an entire podcast just featuring Roger King cases, without a doubt.
And what is Mr. Stokes in prison for?
A triple murder that occurred in 1982 in Philadelphia at Smokin' Joe's Cafe.
The Smokin' Joe Frazier, had a barbecue joint in Philadelphia, and there was a triple murder that happened there one day. And again, a lot of the details are dubious that ended up putting him behind bars.
All right, and where can everybody find your show and get more information on these cases?
We are on all of the different podcast formats, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Stitcher, and wherever you get podcasts, we're on all of them. Injustice is the name. We've got a bit of a social media presence. We're trying to ramp that up and continue to highlight some other cases other than just the case that we're covering at the time. So we encourage people to follow us on Twitter and Instagram, TikTok. We're working on that still. But yeah, we encourage everybody to come along for the ride.